Thank you. So great to be here. I gotta ask you, am I in Google land? Are you guys really Googlers? Because you're kind of famous out there. And whether you realize it or not, you hold an incredible amount of influence. You really do. We're going to talk about that. Mm-hmm. How many of you want to change your career trajectory in some way? Raise your hand. Mm-hmm. How many of you want to change your personal trajectory in some way? How about your legacy trajectory that you want to leave in some way? Mm-hmm. And how many of you wouldn't raise your hands no matter what I said? All right, I think we're pretty good. So great to be here. Thank you, Danielle. Yeah. And Stephanie Reed Hoffman, who's actually on our advisory board for Girls with Impact. So she's awesome.
Yeah, she's a Googler in New York. So if you don't mind, I'd love to start when you were young. This idea that you decided to go get a job as a motel maid at the age of 14. What on earth inspired you to do that and to do that job?
My mom found herself single when I was 5 years old, and she was single with no formal education, 3 little kids, 1, 4, and 5, and she had to work 2 full-time jobs as a waitress to make ends meet. And I that had a huge impact on me. And when I was 12 years old, riding home from school one day on my navy blue Schwinn bike, I sort of had this epiphany. And it was, sort of a vision that 3 things became really clear, which was I wanted my own financial independence. Mm-hmm. I wanted to have a big impact. And I had this sense, because nobody was there for my mom, that it was all up to me and that I was going to have to pull myself up by the bootstraps. So I was really focused on trying to make something of myself, and I didn't care what it took. I wanted to put myself through college, and so that was the job down the road. And at least I can say I can make a bed the Holiday Inn way. So still to this day.
That's awesome. I mean, I completely resonate with the idea of financial independence. That was a very early driver for me as well. And, as I just mentioned, I've found myself kind of jumping around, trying to find that thing that's going to generate interest, but also have a huge impact and also help my pocketbook. Yeah. So when you're deciding to make these shifts, how do you know when it's the right time?
Yeah, it's really hard, right? I mean, sometimes you're forced to make a shift. And I hear a lot of that from some people. But, an interesting story, I used to work in California government for Governor Jerry Brown's sister, Kathleen Brown. And she was running for governor, and I was her press secretary. And I sort of had an aha moment. And I thought, I could spend the rest of my career promoting somebody else's ideas, or I could develop my own ideas. And it was a moment where I and I think this is really important for all of you, is to look at the path you're on. Is the path you're on going to get you to where you want to go? And at that point, I sort of decided, I think I'll be pigeonholed if I stay in state government too long. I thought it would, so I moved into the financial industry. And then the other thing that I think is really important in deciding, when do you make that change, is looking at trends and data. And so kind of fast forward a little bit, I was in business school and working full-time at a large bank, and I was noticing a lot of data and trends. And those trends at the time were that women were building wealth, but they were not going to places like Yahoo Finance to invest their money. Mm-hmm. And I sort of had an aha, and in short, developed this idea for Women's Financial Network, which is the first financial site for women. My boyfriend at the time, though, said, Jen, I mean, it's a really good idea, but Charles Schwab could come in and take you over tomorrow. And he was sort of right about that, but I thought, what, they're not doing it now. I got my business plan in hand. I had started to form a team, and I was like, what, I'm gonna go for it. And it completely changed the trajectory of my career. I was working at a financial firm at the time, and my boss invites me over for dinner. Whole different thing. I mean, I felt like all of a sudden I had climbed 10 rungs up the career ladder. I ended up doing a book, becoming Microsoft Money spokesperson. It completely changed my career. So what I would say is, look at the path you're on. Is it getting you where you want to go? Is it building the kinds of skills that you want? Getting you the kind of connections that you want? Giving you the credibility that you need to move forward? And then also think about the data or trends taking place. I think it's really important to stay at the forefront. And then there's a little gut that comes into play there.
Yeah, yeah. But all that can be pretty darn stressful, right?
It can be stressful, yeah.
They say that the top stress makers are getting married, moving, and changing your career, maybe? So how do you manage all that?
Well, it's really tough, right? I mean, I actually had an experience where I sort of adopted a philosophical approach. So a long time ago when I worked for another elected official, as I was kind of coming out of UCLA, I got a job, got close to a job as the assistant press secretary for then Mayor Tom Bradley of LA, very famous mayor. And they basically told me I had the job, and I went back to my day job, and I'm still wrapping up college. And they called me up and they said, you know what, sorry, but the mayor wants more diversity on the team. And I actually completely got it. I was a woman, but he wanted really more diversity. And it was kind of okay. And so I sat back, and then a couple months later, I ended up getting, through the boss at the time, connection to ultimately become the press secretary to Kathleen Brown, Governor Jerry Brown's sister. And at the age of 25. That was an amazing opportunity. And so I really now feel, and some of this comes from age, that things happen at the right time for a reason, and it's really easy to get impatient. And so I, still to this day, I will force myself to breathe and say, the time will, when the right opportunity is there, it's going to happen. But it's also important to keep yourself out there and open to those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, you've done such an amazing job, and which is really evident in your book, where she's interviewed, hundreds of highly, highly influential people all over the world. How did you build your influence and your personal brand so that you could have these interviews and really gain those insights and connections?
So I think credibility is so important, especially here in the Valley. And I saw the power of that when I worked in government for Kathleen, because they were sort of considered the Kennedys of the West Coast in the media. And so I saw the influence of media. And then when I was starting to build my first company and I had just a business plan in hand, I went to then ultimately ended up meeting with the CEO of CBS MarketWatch, financial site in town. And I had this idea, and a long story short, he wasn't willing to invest in it, but he said, why don't you become our Women in Money columnist? And I scratched my head and I thought, oh my gosh, another thing to do. How am I going to do this? But I thought, it's going to give me some credibility as I'm out building this business. I'm going to do that. And so there's so much power in credibility. But the other piece of it, there's a couple other pieces, is number one is having a niche focus. Look at yourself and the expertise that you have that's really unique to you and build off that. I mean, everybody has that. And trust me, I've had to go through exercises with myself to really think about what is it that I know? For me, it's the nexus of finance, technology, and women, I would say, right? Somewhat unique. So look at that. And then the other is, don't underestimate the power of confidence, because a lot of people, no matter what level you're at, you might think, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't be talking to a CEO, I'm not whatever. But if you don't deliver a message with confidence, you're never going to go anyplace. You all know something extremely well. You wouldn't be here working if you didn't. I don't care what area it is, content, marketing, digital, data, analytics. And so when you present something, the power of presenting it with authority and credibility, it will make all the difference in your ability to move forward. The last thing is that I do, and I've had to learn this, I mean, I came from completely nothing, is pulling in those threads that build that credibility foundation for you. So there have been times when I'm talking to somebody or wanting to form a partnership or whatever, and I built an advisory board with some named people to give me that credibility. So people said, oh yeah, that's interesting to me. So those are some ways that you can do. The last thing that's worth mentioning is connecting with people on a personal level. It doesn't matter who you're talking to, CEO, janitor, whatever. Everybody is a person. And sort of a good example is back to when I was building Women's Financial Network and wanting to connect with very influential people to endorse or whatever. One was Debbie Fields of Mrs. Fields Cookies. And the reason she kind of came back is that she saw what happened with her mother, couldn't even balance a checkbook. And she was dealing with her own daughter. So that personal connection, no matter who you're talking to, pitching, building relationships, wanting to form a partnership, honestly, I think comes down to that personal connection almost more than anything.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, given that I came from the news space and I know how finicky media can be, you know, you say it as if it's so easy to get the attention of media, but how do you do that? Like, how did you get someone to say, yes, Jennifer, we'll have you on CNN, or how did you get on Oprah?
You know, there's really a power in things building upon things. So that I also hugely believe in the power of, boy, there's so many good examples, and we'll talk about one a little bit later, but when something happens, is to build upon it. I mean, a few examples would be, for example, when Martha Stewart was going through her crisis, I had a really kind of interesting message. I said, you know what? Like, despite what she has or has not done, she has still delivered products of great value that everyday people can use. I think she might withstand this crisis. And I went on CNN the next thing, and I was doing live shows, and the next thing is like Fox and the other media are seeing that. Here in Silicon Valley, when I was here, actually what happened is I got profiled in the San Francisco Chronicle, and I had been thinking about a book, and the agent said, you know what, now we've got that profile, we can take it to the publisher. They like seeing it because it's credibility, and and you also have a company. And then that led to a lot of other things, and also understanding how to tell a good story helped, or how to communicate. In my case, it was educating people about finances. So when I started building this company, you know, I sort of said, gosh, I want to help build our brand, but I don't want to spend gazillions of money like a lot of companies do. Sometimes I think not so wisely. I thought, you know, I'm going to try to position us as the authority on women and money. You know, I'm not bad on TV. I'm not great. Done a little bit, but it wasn't not as good as a lot of other people. And I tried to. And when I went on, good enough to be asked back on. And so all of that created this. And then what happened? Then Microsoft, then because I was out in the media, then Microsoft saw me out there, and they wanted to do a campaign across the country educating women about money, and they came to me, and I worked for them for 3 years.
So it was really finding that niche, that unique thing, and then getting the one media outlet to pick you up and then start generating interest with other outlets once you use your ability to pick up the trend, and then that leads to so many new opportunities. I mean, it's really smart.
And a couple other things you guys can do, and I talk about people. So let's say you have a particular niche and you have something to say, because there's so many interesting trends going on. You could write a byline. You could partner with somebody of great authority at another organization and do a byline. Then you can take that byline and take it to a media outlet. Truth be told, though, media is a lot harder today than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
Especially the state of everything right now.
Oh, it's so different to get your message out. And so I wouldn't discount some of the big influencers on social media channels as well, and events.
So I think a lot of us, I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but at some point have been interested in starting something, whether that be a nonprofit or a company of our own one day. But making the shift from a major corporation to starting your own business just seems so overwhelming. How did you make this shift? What was the thing that sort of helped you to make that transition?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a plan before you make a leap. I see people who don't think through the basic things. So clearly, like a business plan, but also what I mean that I think can make a difference if you're going to make a change, let's say, is to have a team with you. I mean, one of the lessons I learned that led to that book is don't go it alone. I sort of, for too much of my career, I actually went it alone. And I learned, and that's again why I did the book, I learned in looking at really wealthy people or financially successful people, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Oprah, you think from the media that they did it all by themselves, but they really didn't. They had a core partner in there with them, and then they leveraged their networks to extend externally. And by the way, those folks do leverage their networks more than other people, and women tend to not leverage their networks and relationships as much as men, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So in making the leap, I think, one way to think about it is you want to build a moat around you so that you're in as steady a foundation as possible. And ways that you can do that is having a team, having a deal in hand. I could give an example too of when I was at Bank One, actually. I knew I wanted to start another venture, and I had an idea for some kind of versions of Quicken software, but a little more simplified for consumers. And I had started building this budget kit, and before I left, I went to the credit card division. I said, you know what, I'm going to try to get a deal in hand to distribute my products through there, and I did. So I would leave with things in place. I would never leave, if you need funding for your venture, I would never leave without funding in place. I would try to have a deal or two in hand. I would have a core team, and I would make sure that your team doesn't look and reflect just like you, because you want somebody who can go into those other areas or bring those other skills that you don't have, right? That's the power of having a team.
Yeah.
So those are a few things. And then always a plan B. What if it doesn't work out? Or what if I decide to, stay here and I'm going to go to, China and take on a role? And the what if? A lot of people don't think and plan through the what if. I would say, if you have spouses or dear friends, talk that through so you are really thinking through, okay, if something falls apart, if a leg in the stool falls, what's my game plan?
Yeah. I mean, one of the keys that you mentioned in your book is make them want it. And I think here at Google, we have 20% projects, and we're trying constantly to get everybody interested in our new product idea. And there's, of course, with physical products, you can get those out in the market and you can test them, which you talk a lot about in your book. But one thing that I've struggled with is, what if it's a service? What if it's something like consulting? Then how do you test what you can offer if it's you that you're offering?
Yeah. So that's a good one. Actually, I've had some friends from some big companies right here come to me on that very issue, but I'm going to use Mario as a good example. So Mario headed up Quicken Money way back in the day, okay? And he did exactly that. And I think he did it the right way. He ultimately, what his business is outsourced web development, but in South America. When you're thinking about making a change, and particularly in consulting, because there's so many people out there. There are people leaving McKinsey to start up consulting businesses and technology, right? That's who you're going up against. I would think a few things. One is what you're delivering really differentiating? Is it powerful? I think Mario had that, because you know what he had? Lower cost, English speaking, same time zone. Aren't many people were going to a lot of other places, right? So definitely a compelling, and on top of it, he knows software development. He was doing it for Intuit, okay? So have something, it's gotta be compelling. If you wanna stay in business, secondly, I would think about bringing really powerful people to your team. When you have the strength of the Google name behind you, it's not that as nearly as difficult as a lot of other people. So I believe in the power of brand association. What are some, you want to bring oomph to this team, like caliber, so that when you go in and you're pitching business, they go, God, this team, they've been at Google and they've been at, McKinsey, whatever. And oh gosh, they know data analytics and they've built these models. And okay, so that's that. And then I would test the waters with potential clients, and I would actually try to have a client or two ready to go. That's what, and then the last is, again, have a plan B. So in your plan, you set some clear goals. By the first 6 months, we need to achieve X and Y for this to make sense for us. And I've seen sort of the power of people setting real markers. Sometimes we set small goals, but I was recently with a team of people and with a big global company and revenue kind of down, and this particular team on a Saturday had met and they were thinking, so what should our goal be for this year? Well, it could be 40 million. They said, you know what, let's stretch it. Let's make 60, I'm picking the number, but these are the range of numbers. 65 million is our goal. We're going to go for 65. They went for 65. They exceeded it. The following year, they're in the 100 million plus, and the following year, they're 200 million. So if they hadn't set those kind of markers, the following years, they would not have achieved what they achieved, right? They wouldn't have. So it's the power of thinking big. I really love the power of thinking big. Even here at Google, and in one of my roles, I remember thinking like, I'm going to focus. And we've all heard the advice of focusing, but it was right before I started Women's Financial Network. I was working at another financial firm after Bank of America. Really great, loved it. And but I had this idea, but I also thought when I went to that firm, I was like, you know what, I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 big rocks that are going to make a difference. It's really easy to get caught up in the minutia all day. It's really easy. But if you move 1 or 2 big rocks, like it gets noticed. And that goes back to building your personal brand and increasing your worth. Like, and I know you guys have a chance for projects here in innovation. Like if you led something, like
we have this thing here called OKRs, and I feel like they can always end up being 50 lines long. So consolidating that to just what are the top 3 things that you really want to focus on is something that I feel like we all could work on.
And then stay focused.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting a deal. Long story short is this company has an index kind of like the S&P 500 index, but it really measures the whole market. Nobody knew about it. Long story short, I ended up doing a deal with CNBC to use it on TV. And I never said anything to anybody, keep it quiet until things are buttoned up. And that was a really big win. The CEO, even years later, would remember that. So focusing on the big kills when you have the strength of Google like you all do.
Yeah. There was a piece of advice that you gave in your book with, Maya Angelou was one of the contributors. And you had said this is something that had really resonated with you and gave you sort of the ability to go out there and meet anyone. What was that advice that really stuck with you?
Wait, her advice?
Maya Angelou, yeah.
Oh, she said that the people should not look at themselves no less than the CEO and no greater than the babysitter whom she pays, but truly an equal person. And I think maybe more importantly, she said that, there's a way that you walk into a room. It's not that you're so braggadocious, she said, but there's a way that you carry yourself with some felicity, some warmth, and people feel like I can be okay with this person. And so the example would be, and I don't know if some of you have had it with leaders, and I've had to learn it, but it makes you feel kind of powerful, is, working with CEOs, and when you really know what you're talking about and you say it with authority, because they're looking for good advice themselves, by the way, they can't do it all. They will listen, and they will then come to rely on you, and they'll come back. And so it's like taking a breath, getting in your power. And I've used the power of visualization a lot in my life, a lot. We could talk about that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually love to go there for a moment, because I think a lot of people, and you had mentioned this in your book, have this mantra that they sort of say to themselves, or this thing that just changes their entire presence in a meeting or while they're talking to a business leader, or you have that pitch that you're trying to make. Like, what is your process, and what tips can you give to people to develop what they can use in those moments?
So many good. I'll give you like a really good example. So after I sold my company here, I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. I figured I'd start something again, wasn't quite sure. I thought, maybe I'll work at a large company. I ended up pitching Jamie Dimon, who was then the CEO. He's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase now. Pitching him, exploring working with him. He was the CEO of Bank One at the time. And I ended up getting a meeting with him. And I'm sitting there and now I was prepared. We'll get to the tips in a second. And I'm just thinking, what am I going to say when I go in there, right? But in all honesty, my suggestions are, number one is to always do your homework and know something about the person. I think there's so much power in making a personal connection with somebody. And you can do that by, there's a lot you can find online. You can pick up something in an office and it can tell you a lot, and you can start from a conversation from there. I like to, when somebody recently was looking for advice. She's looking for a promotion in her in her company, actually, and she needs to sell herself more. And I said, what I would do is a one-pager that very clearly and somewhat visually, not a bunch of text, crystallizes your brand and the impact you've had here. And she did that. And then go have conversations with all the key stakeholders. And she's doing that right now. So back to my meeting, I ended up having a one-pager on some specific ideas to build the business that, of course, leveraged what I knew. So that's the other thing. And then the last is to try to offer something of value to somebody when you're meeting with them. And, one it sort of depends on the situation, but in a lot of cases, it can be as simple as looking on LinkedIn at the connection points that you have and having a conversation where at some point you're saying, gosh, do you know so-and-so at such and such company? And they'll say no. You say, well, would you like me to introduce you? A lot of people like to do that. They appreciate that. And then lastly is, you've picked up some personal things or things in that meeting with somebody, anything from their dislikes to personal items to things they shared. Remember that or tuck it away as I do and include something personal in a follow-up note. I think it makes a big difference. Like I really liked it when you said that it really stood out, or, I think one of the things that could help you move the needle on such and such that you talked about was that it makes a difference in your ability to connect with that person and then to come back to them later if you need to.
To get to your point about how many people want to leave a legacy, Jennifer's company is working with a bunch of girls trying to help develop them into future female leaders. So what are some of the things that you think are critical to developing in our youth to really propel women to the top?
Well, you can't open the newspaper without reading about, future of work, getting everybody ready for AI and cryptocurrency and all this stuff, diversity, talent pipeline. And it's strange that, here we are today and only 6% of CEOs are women. So we want to change that. And oddly, while there's a lot of stuff in the STEM and coding space, when you look at entrepreneurship or business, there isn't anything that equips teen girls in this case to actually build those skills. And so over 12 weeks, they go through a mini MBA. They do it after school. We offer it year round. And they go from ideation to an actual business plan. And they're launching ventures. One of them made international headlines a couple weeks ago.
That's awesome.
So we're moving the needle in their confidence, in giving them a leg up, scholarships, but at the same time, allowing people like you to really, my hope is that all of you will join us in creating the next generation of real leaders and playing a role in that with us, because you can do it on a personal level. There's so many different ways to be involved, but it's been incredibly exciting what these girls are doing.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
And for companies like Google too, who are looking to build, a talent pipeline,
right.
This is really important. And to take what they're learning in STEM, they can't take what they're learning in STEM or coding if they don't have the business or entrepreneurship skills to create companies and jobs.
Well, thank you. I'd now like to turn to the audience if anybody has any questions for Jennifer.
So from Emily in Tech Corners, sometimes the power of confidence of delivery outweighs the power of expertise or skill. Have you run into that before? If so, how do you manage it?
So I have been in those roles. So two things that I do. One is there have been moments where I've taken somebody's advice and I just go, get in your power. And I stand up tall. One time when I was hosting some shows, the producer of the guy said, some advice that he had gotten was to love your audience. And I think there's real power in putting a smile on your face. It just puts you in the mood. I think dressing the role actually can give you a lot of confidence, much more so than you might give credit. It has for me. And the last thing is the power of visualization. So I want to share kind of a fun story. Is I, had a little bit of TV background, and when I was really young, it was sort of a kind of what I thought was a dream job. But long story short, I end up getting called by CBS TV in LA to come in for an audition tomorrow, to be their live money expert on TV tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't done this in a year, and I'm not really that good, and oh my gosh, but it'd be cool. So I get on the phone, I said, can we do this Thursday? I'm like, I need to buy time. I was like, oh my gosh. And then I just said, you know what? Because this was kind of like my dream. I said, you are going to get this. you are going to get this. And I just focused, and I was like, I am pulling out the stops to get this. And I'm just going to focus, and I'm going to deliver. And I visualize myself. And actually, that little experience I shared when I was 12 years old, the epiphany, really was a visualization about impacting people on a large scale. Mm-hmm. I ended up going into this station. I'm next to the TV anchor I grew up with. You know, how weird is that, right? And it's after the morning show, and they're like, okay, let's do a dry run, Jen, and let's see if she can do it. And so we do a dry run, and it's okay. And okay, we're tape is rolling, we're live, and we do the shtick. I'm talking about money, and it was out of the park, and you sort of know that. So I really think you have to visualize yourself, and I've seen this countless times. Visualize yourself delivering it or speaking with authority. Picture yourself doing that. And then
right.
go in and do it.
I mean, this is sort of similar to another theme in the book that really resonated. So I'm going to jump in with one more question. But you talk about redefining your comfort zone. And what I found so interesting is, everybody says, take a leap, just go do this thing. But it's not really taking that big of a leap, right? You're still I'd love to hear sort of what you're spieling on, because I thought it was so helpful.
Yeah. And so first off, 45% of millionaires experienced fear, and 2/3 of them, though, yet said that they had to move outside their comfort zones in order to build their financial success, right? It just makes sense. You can't stay where you are and get to where you want to go. You cannot stay where you are and get to want to go where you can't. To our friend, have the expertise and not deliver it with confidence. You're holding yourself back. Why? There's nothing to be afraid. Like we hold ourselves back. Mm-hmm. And so one way when you're making a change is to realize you're never going to something completely unfamiliar. You're almost always leveraging your skill set. It could be a network that's around you. It could be some people that are working with you that you worked with before. There's some familiarity to it. And then the last thing is in the book, there's a story about Trisha Raymer. She was a school teacher, actually made like $100,000, but she had this cosmetics business on the side, and she wanted to make the leap, and she was kind of nervous about it. And she had a couple kids, and she had this aha moment, and she said she was afraid of losing her paycheck, right? Makes sense, right? And she said, but I'm actually not really guaranteed a paycheck. I have to show up every day, and I have to do it. And there's lots of ways. I just had a conversation this weekend with a good friend who has sold 2 companies, a woman. She has a young child, so she's decided she intentionally wants to keep things ramped down, but her innovative mind has 2 other business ideas. So what she's going to do is she's going to prep them to take to other companies for them to run with, and she might get a licensing, piece of it, or help them get it off the ground or something. Good idea, way of staying in what she's doing. But still being able to maybe see her ideas come to life, which you can do to some extent at Google.
Yeah. I mean, getting creative about the things you're not great at and using what you are great at. When looking back at some of the changes I've made successfully, it was all things that weren't huge leaps, that I was doing something that I had already been doing before. And the things that didn't go so well, I tried to make too far of a leap, and that's kind of where things go wrong. So this was the first time I'd ever heard it crystallized in that way. Any other questions in the audience?
So first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us today. My question is around comfort zones. As we talked about, when we speak on wealth generation, people look at that and they look at millionaires and billionaires and think, wow, that must have taken a long time, or they had a very innovative idea, and how do they get in that space? What would you say to people who are looking to build wealth or become more financially sound, but see it so far off in the distance that they're kind of stuck in place, if you will? Like they're cautioned to move, and they think, oh, it's such a long journey, and I have to do so much to get there.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think I've seen people can get there faster than you think. So 2 examples. Big story over this past weekend about people who had become millionaires in their 30s, and they made a conscious decision because they wanted to live a different life. They basically didn't want to be beholden. And there's so many ways that you can live below your means. I did it. I mean, I was always about living below your means, because every time you're spending money, it's going to somebody else and not yourself, and the power of compounding that over the years. There's definitely things like completely taking advantage of your 401k. Whenever you come across any kind of windfall or extra money, like tucking it aside all the time. I got lucky when I sold my company. Well, not lucky, I paid attention, made some money and really thought about how I was going to grow it. And I put it in real estate and literally tripled it in 5 years. The other really interesting story is that my stepfather found himself completely out of money at like about 60. He had never saved, generation hadn't learned. He started his own business and it was about to get a contract with the city of LA. And long story short, didn't get that contract probably because of some other political stuff, and didn't know what to do. And I actually ended up moving in with my parents. And I was actually in business school at the time, and I sort of feel like, there was a reason I was living down in that area. And he reinvented himself, which is something that everybody has to be continuously at the forefront. He amazingly learned like CAD skills, all the software, internet. I mean, here's a guy who was 60, and this is like 10 years ago. I mean, it was really impressive.
Sweet.
And then when he had nothing, so then he ended up getting hired. He's an engineer by background. That's it. He's an engineer for like public facilities and stuff. And he ended up getting hired by a solid construction company that's been around many years. And he ended up putting aside like $500,000 in not that long a time. And they still had, a fairly normal lifestyle. They had to make a big shift and a change. But it's okay. Like the world makes us feel like we have to be living large. I could care less about having a bigger, and I don't have a big house, by the way. I actually don't want a bigger house. But there is some confidence and freedom that really comes from putting it aside and feeling in control. And if you're married, like having conversations about, and I did this very regularly. In fact, every year I set my own plan. I've done this for probably 20 years, and I used to do it. In fact, I wrote it up like buddy system. But every year at the beginning of the year, I always think about my goals for the year, and I lay them out from a financial perspective, career, and personal, including building friends or networks, because I haven't been doing that, and I know it's important. I want to share the Alex story because it's a really great one. So this past weekend, this friend of mine is at my house, and I said, gosh, Giselle, kids are with the kids. Gosh, Giselle, my husband and I were kind of talking like, it's very interesting. We have dinner parties, we have people over, but people don't reciprocate a whole lot. And she says, Jen, let me share something. When I was married to Alex, and Alex is 49 right now, nice looking guy. She works for a hedge fund. We lived in a 7,000 square foot house. He made great money. And I said, Alex, why don't we have your team over? Why don't we have the analysts over? We have this house, like, what are we paying for? And he just wasn't comfortable with it. He was like an introvert. He lost his job. It is 3 years later, and he now has verbally recognized the shortfall of just failing to reach out. And I want to go to something about networking too, which is rather than feeling, oh, I got to network, I got to do this, I would take a different twist to it. I would view it as, I just want to have good impact in the world. I want to talk to this person, see if I can be helpful in some way and impart what I know. And by the way, I learned so much back now from people. I used to sit on an airplane, I would maybe like not be so open, but you pick up so much, and opening yourself to the possibilities of what's around you can take you to where you want to go, internally and externally.
Yeah, I mean,
there's so much more to talk about.
I
right?
know. What you were saying earlier totally reminded me of Mom's advice, where she had said, everything you buy owns a part of you. And when you said save and you don't have a large house, I think that constricts you and might reduce your confidence to take that step. So having that safety net really does impact your ability to maneuver in ways, because you have a cushion.
I just have a very quick question about identifying your niche. If you
About
can-
what?
Identifying your niche. If
Your
you can give
niche.
us some guidance about how you did it and any advice on
Yeah,
that. would
you
be
know,
helpful.
if you know the space you're in, and I would kind of imagine all of you do because you're like in it. By the way, the best ideas in business and stuff come from like your experience. You stumble across something. So your niche, like for me, it was, I really sort of stepped back. You know, I have done grids before, like, okay, but if I were boiling it down to the three things that are really me, that are unique, so I want them to be unique, compelling, and like kind of at the forefront of where trends in industry is going, right? So much now is like data and AI and automation and what else? People and talent, I mean, right? So, but there's so many, food is going in all sorts of different places, crazy different places. So I would literally crystallize it to three words that define the space that you know and that you're good at and that where there's value to be had in the market.
So like an overlap between a trend that's happening and
Yes.
something that you're really good at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that make
That makes
sense?
sense.
And then the other way to think about it too is if you were going to write an article right now in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, and you were going to like leverage what you know, what would you write about? What would the headline be and what would you talk about? And I bet your three themes should be like, you know, they'll be floating in there, right?
That's interesting.
I heard you said you started off as a maid when you were 14.
I was.
How did you, I guess, go from that situation to like even knowing to go into real estate or like knowing about stocks?
That's a really good, you know, I mean, I feel so blessed today. I mean, I really, because, so when I'm having my bad days, I go, God, like, I could have been in a very different situation. You know, there's power in education, and that's why we do Girls with Impact, because I feel like if I didn't go to college, and even business school really changed my thinking to a whole more sophisticated level, changed my income like that too. For most people it does. And it changes your ability to operate with people on a higher plane, sort of. You know, you can sort of argue business school, there's so much, but, you know, and I think watching and paying attention to a lot of people. So small little example, I'm just pulling something, you know, a long time ago, I remember when I was working in politics and a lawyer we worked with, and he had written a book on going to meetings. And I read that book and something really stood with me, which is now whenever I go to a meeting, I jot down like, what do I want to come away with? And even if I'm going to get rejected, which like I've been rejected a gazillion times, it hurts, but I know it's going to happen. And I just like, hope for the best and prepare for the worst, is I still try to come out of something with that meeting. And that could be a relationship with them, because you know what? That person has a gazillion relationships themselves, okay? And that's happened before. I met with somebody, a VC guy, and he introduced me to somebody else. It could be that they're going to introduce you to somebody. Okay, that's great. You know, by the way, do you think there's somebody, like I'm meeting here with folks about Girls with Impact, and I'm having that very conversation because it's a really small world. Like it's a crazy small world, and you never know who you're going to bump into. So, you know, back to your question, it's like, it's watching people wanting to do something bigger. And it's a combination of luck, I think. It was also partly intentionally looking at the big picture, the trends, and feeling like, I think we can be an authority in this space because I see the trends. There's no authority on women and money. They're making more money. Everybody cares about women. They're writing the checks. By golly, maybe I have something. I'm not great, but maybe it'll be good enough. And I knew the strategy of how to come up with a good story, a good angle. And so I'd go on, and I was good enough so things feed on themselves. And I guess I would say, like, no matter where you're going actually we talk about this, is the power of telling a good story, a good, whatever it is, succinctly, not too long, visually when it makes sense. The visual identity of Girls with Impact, the guy who did that made all the difference in the world. Like, it's the difference between looking like you have a product and you're professional versus something else. Find somebody if you need to, like, put your best foot forward.
Yeah. I love that. So we'll take one more question.
So my question is about skill development. So when we want to grow in our life, either in the personal life or the career, there are so many skills we need to learn. And then given a time, we don't have too much time in a day.
No.
So how do we choose the best skill that's most important to us? And how do we strategize to ensure that we are not missing up in some other skill that may later be important and we may end up in some issues? This is a big issue that I face.
Yeah, that's a really good. So how do you develop the best skill given that you have limited time, right? To keep yourself current and moving forward. I'm going to come back to it more, Crystal, but even like with Girls with Impact, for me, I was in Davos and saw the trends and felt like, this also keeps me personally at the forefront of innovation and where things are headed. So for you, I would be looking at what do I actually like doing? I think you got to really like what you're doing, because forget it. So, and then I would force yourself to narrow it down to like 3 to 5 of those. I really like these. Then I would probably look at, okay, where are the trends going? Like the skills that are gonna be in demand. And you might know that off the top of your head. You could look at where Google is placing money in training or looking to buy up companies. That's a way of doing that, right? To
our company OKRs.
Yeah, to hardcore research reports, right? Or where money is going. So like cryptocurrency is a big example. That would be sort of the other way I would look at doing it. And then I would think like, you could even have a conversation with somebody like, seeing like, could you develop a skill and apply it to something that would be of value here, like in a new effort? That's kind of interesting, because what does that do? You build your skill, you increase your value potentially here, and you increase kind of your potential monetary earning potential. And then hopefully it's kind of the skill that's in demand. But
yeah, I think the overlap with, you really have to like it is such a key.
You do. You have to like really enjoy it. Like if you love model, I got to share this. This is great, and then we'll wrap it. But I had this young woman from another country who, it's a great story. But she ended up working for me. She works for my husband now, and she has her colleague who, frankly, doesn't really speak much English. Okay, but she is a math wizard. I mean, and by the way, the CEO of this company, it's a division of a large company. I mean, very sophisticated. They have seen nothing of what this girl has pulled together, allowing them to see competitors and where money's going is unbelievable. So like, for example, that is a great example. Like if you were like a genius in one particular place and you liked it, I would explore that and then go where the future demand or the trends are going with things that we're seeing and we read about in the headlines.
Yeah, double down on the thing that you're good at. I've been in so many teams where other people are more passionate maybe in a particular area, and there's no way you can compete, right? Because they're talking to their friends about that subject in the evenings. They're doing something about it on the weekends, and here you are just trying to recover from the week, right? So having that thing that you're interested in is so helpful.
And set a marker again even for that. So, okay, it's not going to be in the next 2 months maybe, but over the next year, each quarter, I'm going to do X, or I want to get a certificate in X, or, if Google is really like, let's just say they were covering something or they wanted something, maybe, it can make a difference in putting you into a different role, having a certain skill set.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. If people here on the live stream or on YouTube want to get involved with Girls with Impact, how can they do so?
So I want and need all of you to join us with Girls with Impact, please. Boys and girls, like whether we are all in this together. So you can either just help amplify what we're doing. Please go to Girls with Impact. We're going to send out an email.
Yeah.
You can play a role in supporting a girl to go through the training. You could also, if you want, mentor a girl. And we keep it pretty flexible, not heavy duty, because people are all over the place. But it's a great way to have a personal legacy and to really join us in hopefully having a really big legacy. I hope you all will.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.